Crawl into yourself, drink your misery like a fine liqueur. It is, at least, a genuine feeling. Darkness, the dead, the living. There's nothing to distinguish the one from the other. They are nothing but you, in any case. You being a more random than not assortment of dipshit neurotransmitters, jumping about and across this or that synapse. Cling to your filthy, rotten past because it's yours, and you have no way of unburdening yourself of it. It must mean something, yes? Why, of course. It is you, after all. And because this is the case, it is incumbent upon you to smear this shit upon your present, upon your future, upon any of the dream phantoms you happen upon during the course of a day, and to assume those dream phantoms hear and understand that shit exactly as you would, were you listening to all the detestable nonsense bubbling out of your rancid mouth. You are a bag of entrails bathed in sauces, cooked in the fires of your self-interest and sadism. Your choices are more than a little constricted. Death, hypocrisy, intoxication, rage, and desire, followed, inevitably, by satiation and disgust. You would ennoble your solitude with fine words, with lie upon lie, with thinking and naming it wisdom, which is, were you to look at yourself momentarily with something other than hypocrisy, nothing other than your infantile grandiosity and solipsism. Although there's something to be said for solipsism, let's not kid ourselves. It's the truth of the world and the only reliable source of our pleasure. And yet, the sound of your voice, even when speaking alone, sickens you. You see quite clearly that the only way to go forwards, in an even minimally honest way, is to sleep, to skip merrily down the path towards oblivion, as rapidly and effectively as you can, in the presence of others, whom you readily recognize as figures of your imagination. You experience only regret, ennui, the brute, barbarous, mind-numbing repetition, the knowledge that you've seen and heard all of this before, on an infinite number of occasions. These very same tunes, counterpoints, and counterfeit improvisations, masquerading as inspiration. You are tired, bone-tired. Sleep it must be then. It is all that is available, the only reliable narcotic. For now, at least. Right and wrong, making a point, even to yourself, these things mean nothing to you. All that matters is keeping the din of all these nattering insects who flit about you to a minimum, to stop them from speaking to you and from feigning their interest, when both you and they know full well that their interest is only in themselves. Those selves which, as if in some Alice in Wonderland hall of mirrors, exist only in you. You know full well that when you find yourself in the presence of these beasts, the only way to achieve some sort of temporary ceasefire with them is to shut the fuck up and endure their perpetual pontifications, their beastly verbal monuments to themselves, the shit which flies out of their mouths so reliably and inevitably. For their vanity's sake, you must make yourself the ground beneath them, a mat upon which they can wipe their stinking feet, and while you are forced to endure it, well, you can philosophize, drink deep of the contempt which is boiling in your bowels, or watch yourself from 10,000 miles behind your eyes, while attempting to remain reasonable, so that you are able somehow to not gleefully slit their throats. Those are your options. In addition, you can look at them as they truly are, bodies, nothing but bodies. And what are bodies? They are, every last one of them, horrid, creaturely, existentially terrifying, disgusting, poisonous, comical, graceless, and poised on a hatpin above the charnel house, a source of much potential amusement. And the longer you stare, the more creaturely and unreal the being upon whom you gaze becomes, and, necessarily, the more creaturely and unreal you yourself become. In that particular moment, which is pressed against an eternity of equally stupid moments, each of which looks upon the other with utter incomprehension, just as you look upon that creature. Time, as confused a jumble as space now, moments pressed against moments, like cheese against bread against meat in that disgusting stomach of yours, like words against words spoken to that beast upon whom your gaze has now alighted, like breath upon air, hatred upon mystification and confusion, and, all the while, the inevitable wish to impale the universe on a dagger forged of spite. Misanthropy is the least of it. The world is a mistake. A mistake into and out of which we enter and leave in the most absurd and grotesque of fashions, violently contracting wombs and bellies, thrashing wildly in fits and starts of fierce, savage, unbearable stretching, burning, ripping, accompanied by fiendish, scorching pain, in an overarching symphony of the most excruciating body-wide wretchedness, of ruptured membranes, spurting thick gobs of blood everywhere, drenching the vile little head of the abominable crotch turd which now begins to poke its gelatinous, slime-encased head out of one stink pit and into that far larger and infinitely more dangerous stink pit, the one in which it will wring out its wearisome, pointless allotment of days. All the while a pale, piss-coloured goop is blasting out from deep within the womb, as out of the cunt flow streams of bubbly, yellow piss, with everywhere the faint smell of hay, swallowed in the stench of the mountainous pile of shit which inevitably spews out of the mother's arse, as that other, flesh-encased pile of shit continues to make its way out the other end. Push, bitch! Push out the monumental piles of manure you've been carrying in your bowels and womb these many days. Flood the world with your filth, your abominations, the one a source of only momentary disgust, the other doomed to host and inhabit a lifetime of horror, terror, misery, and torment, to both experience it and to inflict it. Perhaps the little blob will arrive with a veil over its hideous face, appropriately and, ironically enough, for it is now to be the bride of death, wedded to it for all eternity. Perhaps the monstrous little barbarian has arrived swathed in gobs of cheese, smelling of tit milk, which is to be wiped off in paroxysms of feigned ecstasy. Not long after, the thing becomes visible, that little slab of brownish beef, smelling like raw liver and lemon, and to which a hellish, whitish tapeworm is lustily attached, that most horrid of things, musty, metallic, blood-red, and spongy, all of it resembling nothing more than a pot full of congealed, bloody excrement, a missive, straight from the hell from whence it has emerged. Eat, drink, and be merry, husband, for this atrocity, this diabolical feast, is your doing, your moronic, evil contribution to this ever-burgeoning satanic swamp of misery, this world of ours. Smile as if you've achieved something, for indeed you have. Exactly what rodents and cancer cells achieve, no less and no more. Look tenderly, with a father's love, upon that bloody lump of meat, which is just sloughed out of the very same hole into which you shoved, not all that long ago, that pathetic, little, much-cherished dick of yours, while you and she gurgled protestations of a love which didn't then, and has never existed. Observe most diligently that hole from which has now emerged this monstrous baboon, this hunk of rotting flesh and worms. Listen to its sobs. Why, pray tell, dolt, do you think it sobs? Watch it pulsate, as you pretend this horror on which your eyes now feast does not make your bowels quake in terror, as it does the mother, who has become unrecognizable, busy, as she is, clutching her mucus-filled larva to her chest, while simultaneously realizing both that her life is finished, for it is now to be devoted only to the care of this evil, insatiable gremlin, and, moreover, that you are now quite beside the point. You've given her what her deepest self, of which she heretofore had been profoundly unaware, and of which she was only the unwitting servant and vessel, what that self has been wishing for since time immemorial, since the first, vile, famished, self-replicating molecule tragically appeared in some hot vent on shithole Earth, eons ago. You are now to be discarded. You have now become, implicitly, explicitly, and officially, a nothing, a thing to be, depending on the mother's pleasure at this or that moment, a thing only to be plundered, swindled, pillaged, and sloughed off with a wave of contempt. But no matter, in a period of only a few decades, this will play out in quite predictable ways, ways that will make this momentarily monstrous scene a very minor nightmare in the grand scheme of things, the silliest and most meaningless of dreams, from which you shall never awaken. You'll be lying in a ditch, of one kind or another, your eyes gradually clouding, your skin pale, your temperature falling, your blood rushing to your lower extremities. As you stiffen and begin to putrefy, the stench will be beyond comprehension, but you'll not notice it. Putrefaction, maggots, skeleton, fossil, dust, cloud, rain, rinse, repeat. The shit show must go on, and so it shall. You've played not even a bit part. No one has, or ever could have. Dreams, Amelia, the false alarms of lives, which never should have been. And in between, for you, for that beastly, sweating, weeping, now hideous wife of yours, for that monstrous piece of once fetal, now fecal shit she's just pushed out from that gaping maw which sits between her veiny, wrinkled thighs, which have now become for you a thing of horror. There is time, moments of time bouncing against one another, like miserable subatomic particles, forced into a momentary existence by some grandiose madman operating a gargantuan, labyrinthine supercollider far beneath the earth. Those moments would scurry back into a timeless void, just as readily and eagerly as electrons and quarks were they allowed to do so. Moments, like lonely soap bubbles, condemned to live alongside one another, for but an instant, in an unalterable cosmic loneliness, helpless, begging only to snap, crackle, and finally pop, to be done with it. And so they do and shall, having lived for the briefest sliver of eternity in a horrid hell, as we do and shall. It is no different for us. Infinite moments, infinite universes, all weeping, helpless, screaming, unheard by their neighbours, eviscerated by their loneliness and solitude, who appear and disappear exactly as they. Abominations coughed up by a sadistic and quite mad demiurge, whose laughter is the thing to which those hopelessly solitary moments and beings are privy. Hateful, cruel laughter, ear-splitting, soul-crushing laughter. Listen, surely you hear it too? Of course you do. You feel the sadness. It is immense within you. All the irreconcilable moments of your life, impossible of any connection, sense, meaning, each a hell which might make of itself a thing of worth, had it the opportunity to connect with, to be known by another. But that has never been, and will never be the case. There is only that damnable laughter from without, and the sobs, the endless sobs, the oceans of tears, from within. There is no world, no time. There is only what you feel, projected into the bubbles of the past, present, and future, and all those whom we pretend to know, who appear to give themselves to us freely, we invariably hate. It is only when they spurn us, or are unavailable, that we crave them. But of course, it is not they whom we crave. We covet only the way the dream of them has made us feel, the way it has distracted us from the torturous boredom and pain of our everyday existence, which assaults on all fronts, and against which we must make sure to erect barriers in the forms of distractions. We wish to murder them all, in either case, more immediately when they make themselves readily available, but no less so when they disappear, betray, or reject us. Longing and disgust are the most intimate of bedfellows, and, more often than not, a threesome ensues, in which murderous thoughts sign onto the erotic play of our inner worlds. And they are delicious, these thoughts, so very delicious. In the doing, yes, but even and ever more so in the imagination. For it is in the imagination of vengeance or, better yet, of cold, unmotivated cruelty that the soul blossoms into a gigantic, blood-red flower, upon which one rides through pink clouds in the most delicious of ecstasies, bludgeoning, terrorizing, oppressing, molesting, mutilating. Ah, it is divine. It is the only thing that is the least bit divine in this rancid, sweltering, blistering furnace into which we have been dumped, against our will, for a series of instants, not a one of which communicates with the other. To snuff out the lives of these beasts, of all beasts, of all life, of the inanimate world, of the sun, the galaxy, the universe. No brutality, no crime could ever suffice, could ever compensate one for the crime of having been dragged into this nightmare world. This catastrophe, this Hiroshima, will envelop us, one and all. But we, that is to say, you and I, care not a whit for that all, only for ourselves. We are concerned only to avenge ourselves of this crime, to silence the laughter, the one who laughs, and his accursed creation, all of it, including, in the very last scene of the final act, and with a pleasure much outstripping the destruction and death wrought by us, up until that moment, ourselves. Needless to say, one murderous moment, rapturous as it might be, cannot ever be meaningful, for meaning, if it existed, which it surely does not, would necessarily rely on a series of moments, one of which would possess some means of knowing, infecting, befriending, becoming another moment, but is, rather, a series of unattached and freely floating spores, never to have the slightest intercourse with what is floating directly adjacent to them, quite unknown, and quite incapable of being known, in the ether. So indeed, then, live for the murderous moment, even moments, though they know not of one another's existence. Drink deeply of them, you who don't exist either, for the whole thing is a jumble of absurdity, pebbles strewn randomly on a non-existent beach by a giggling, idiot god, and signifying nothing. Assaulted by memories, all of which are unreal, torturous, and less than meaningless, our heads become a sort of stale cheese, numb caskets perched upon our necks, as if they were bits of moronic styrofoam, discarded from cheap IKEA furniture packaging, all of which pulls us into an appalling state of stupor and paresthesia, intermittently interrupted by painful hunger and mystification, in which we float through what appears to be the physical world before us, which we, at the same time, know full well is a mirage, nothing more than an unlicked postage stamp, buried deep in a drawer, full of scraps of letters, to ourselves, to everyone we've ever known, loved, despised, felt nothing for, letters which we never had the patience, motivation, or talent to bring to fruition, much less send, in which we find, as well, perhaps a filthy spoon, which we haven't the slightest wish to clean, or a cricket, whom we momentarily consider attempting to catch, and whose life we might then attempt to preserve, by ferrying the creature gently outdoors, but soon think better of it, as we fall involuntarily into the deepest and most familiar of apathies and oblivions, given also that said cricket is nothing other than a momentary hallucination of some doppelganger with whom we are unfamiliar, he who had not the slightest notion of cleaning either spoons or himself, for that matter. This doppelganger, who has momentarily co-opted our senses, this dead thing, this zombie, for whom spoons and crickets are nothing other than the chatter of worlds we neither care for nor inhabit, infinite, incomprehensible, internal and external worlds, merging, spinning, lacerating, and eviscerating us, blowing through our bowels like galaxies, up from and out of which we once crawled, only to find ourselves beneath some unfamiliar bed, attempting to hide ourselves from creatures whose only pleasure consisted in attempting to convince themselves they were alive through nocturnal rituals of sadism passed down to them from ancestors, spun out through bubbles of time, hearkening back to the first rogue DNA molecule, which was, indeed, initially confused, yes, stunned and astonished, but which soon found its bearing, felt its passions arising within it, and came to understand its destiny, to rip, shred, torture, murder, and consume. A passion we all share, once we've either been sufficiently honest with ourselves, or have been forced by some vigorous or excruciating circumstance to cast off the shackles of civilization's nonsensical prohibitions, shoved down our throats both by weaklings, convinced they'll be left alone, once they finish shoving those rules of gold, which they long ago invented, down our throats, and by tyrants, whose wish is nothing other than to keep us imbecilic, harmless, and obedient. But of that most of us remain unaware. What we are aware of is, above all else, this intolerable, sharp, racking otherness, and profound loneliness, this beast within us, which is us, screaming into the void, to be touched, known, loved. We screech, we bellow, we howl into the void of a world which is not real, where we find only the echoes of our putrefying bowels, written into everything we see, everything we encounter, be it week-old roadkill, or fireworks of celestial northern lights, shooting through the night sky. With art we sometimes delude ourselves that we have pierced through a sort of veil, a veil which keeps us from what so often eludes us in our mindless daily lives, that we have somehow been made privy to the interior world of this or that genius, and that we are no longer entirely condemned to the execrable isolation we so often feel in our daily lives, shut off from any and all beings, amongst whom we make our way through this venal and endlessly petty world. But this is, needless to say, the purest nonsense. The artwork serves only as a well-crafted vehicle, enabling us to bore down to some depth of ourselves, to shine a floodlight on terrains we previously had not the remotest clue existed within us, that were already very much there, only, heretofore, unobserved by us, because unavailable. Were we to be honest, we would see, with a great deal of certainty, that our response to a work of genius is only further, irrefutable proof of our hopeless solitude, that there has only ever been, and only ever shall be, us, ourselves, this thing, this rancid bag of meat in which we find ourselves imprisoned, this nightmare, this stinking, overly familiar set of terrors and confusions, this body which betrays us so constantly and consistently, settling down momentarily only to rise again, full to bursting with some new set of pains, and with omens of imminent deteriorations, of one sort or another, of the putrefaction which we observe in the unrecognizable images of ourselves in mirrors, which terrify us, annihilate us, and betray us, at every turn and at every moment. We are attracted not least because, not having to acquaint ourselves with said genius, in the flesh, in his or her stark and reliably disappointing, more likely disgusting, reality, we may project onto them, and their works, parts of ourselves, which now feel elevated, and which may, at times, be so, but they are far more likely to be just prosaic parts of ourselves, for which we are suddenly much gladdened to find that we now have permission from seemingly on high to believe these objectively commonplace character traits and sensibilities of ours, somehow noble, and from this we then deduce both our own superiority and the inferiority of others, who are now worthy only of our impatience and scorn. How delicious! Snobs are only those who are foolish enough to broadcast this self-deception. And yet, the faux humble lover of late Beethoven quartets, with and through which he might very well have the most delightful, though necessarily and exclusively self-referential experiences, is not one whit less a snob. His deceptions are just a bit cagier, of himself, first and foremost, but no less of those around him. Having been awakened by vapours wafting up from hell, which clear both sinuses and mind, one sees what all this has been all along. These so-called people, but not only them, all these rooms, beds, blankets, dogs, trees, squirrels, mountains, lakes, ponds no more full of scum than the so-called people, rooms, beds, and blankets. It's all of a piece, a monstrous piece, a practical joke of a universe, a universal practical joke, all the joke of some sadistic, Gnostic demiurge, some Yaldabaoth, whose hidden laughter pours out from black clouds, from beneath anthills, one encounters, on walks, through scandalously unhinged forests, from everywhere, from, and in everything, every inch of our bodies, within, without, right, left, above, below, before, now, to come, a seething, microbial world, buried within and beneath black algae, which demands we mourn this or that piece of conspiratorial filth, whom the present tyrant happens to favor at some particular moment, and wink while the heads are blown off tens of thousands of starving children. Black algae, black march to the scaffold, from which our heads, too, are to roll. Stare at anything, some momentarily gorgeous natural phenomenon, some woman whom you desire desperately, your beloved dog, child. Stare long enough, and they will all become, every bit, as absurd and meaningless as a word you've mindlessly repeated scores of times, and, in so doing, have revealed the emptiness, at its core, at its speaker's core, and at the very core of existence. And that is the optimistic outcome, one of apathy and absurdity, both of which carry the potential for adopting a pleasant, even comical distance. It is, however, far more that likely these visions, beings, and body parts will reveal themselves as, and remain horrific, nightmarish abominations. It's all within you, whether it be a harmless, localized rash, or an alarming spot on some internal organ just now revealed in a malevolent scan ordered by your satanic physician. These things were already within you, in your spirit, your soul. They're to be randomly and momentarily illumined by some remark, scent, melody, counterpoint, fugue, buzzsaw, enticing woman, or horrid crone. They are all already there. You take them for a sort of global truth, when they really are just hobby horses, upon which your ass happened to find itself, at that particular moment, through no virtue or wisdom of its own. Predictably and invariably, this horse then finds bushels of hay upon which to feed itself in the bowels of your memory, whether you are aware of said memories or not, to reinforce and nourish itself, to provide it with the girth and confidence to assert that you, after all this time, are surely now seeing clearly that the madness and folly of your youth is surely a thing of the past, now that this unassailable truth, or worldview, upon which you've just happened to install your bunghole has been grasped. And yet, after a few days, weeks, months, or years, this bold steed becomes the most ephemeral of beings, a lunatic dream, something which you couldn't possibly have thought, believed, or felt, a demented pony, shuffling aimlessly in a hall of mirrors in some sub-Saharan desert, struggling to survive, while, at the very same time, half wishing for death. The Stoics, those laughable fools, but no more so than the other hordes of cults through which your psyche has passed, mesmerized momentarily by this or that bit of nonsense, and compelling you to then obnoxiously proselytize your friends and acquaintances, succeeded only in implanting within you the burning desire to slit this or that new acolyte's throat. And you did it. You couldn't help but do it. You were more than happy to do it. Now, and only in this moment, do we find what we pretend to ourselves is wisdom. What we've actually found is just another bubble of soap, which, when pricked, smells, at first, of a fart, seeming to have been dabbed with the fragrance of a buttered croissant, but which, after a few moments, reveals its bouquet to be only that of one's vanity and blindness, a cheap cologne which unfailingly offends the sensibilities of those unfortunate enough to inhale its fetid perfume. It is the dollar store toilet water of which we all are, made. Air the room, flush the toilet, fumigate vigorously, then rinse and repeat. During a flush in which it feels appropriate to do so, have an accomplice violently thrust your head into said toilet with a plunger, perhaps while he or she whistles the forest bird's little ditty from Act 2 of Wagner's Siegfried. Last week you were a Stoic. This week you're busy reading Marx. Next week you'll more than likely be lying ice-cold in some discount morgue. And it shan't be a set of glorious symphonic variations being performed. Rest assured, you are a neurotic. You are at least intermittently aware that these, momentarily, seeming to be true bits of yourself, which you had at first inhaled with delight, become, not very long after, utterly incomprehensible. That is to say, what it was about these things that had previously entranced you is now something which you can no longer even locate, and which utterly mystifies you. You cannot remember those pieces of that apparently now dead self which found any interest or took the least pleasure in such things. And at such moments, you feel your soul, the existence of which you never did and never will believe in, slipping through the cracks into the air all around you that you'd barely noticed, out through every pore of the body which betrays you constantly, each day in some terrifyingly novel way, and with considerably increased and renewed vigour. You grasp this air, but there's nothing there. And you are nowhere to be found. Within, with it, there is only the abyss, which, who, has conveyed to you, quite plainly, on innumerable occasions, that it despises you, not to mention the ceiling, which is about to fall upon you as well, after which the sky, and, finally, the heavens in which the Gnostic god is busy buggering a host of angelic arseholes, as depicted so charmingly in those miscellaneous apocryphal gospels of which you'd once been so fond. And suddenly you are overwhelmed with loneliness, with the wish to see, to embrace, to kiss Mademoiselle the 10th, knowing full well that what you desire is only to remain in that desire, not to risk fulfilling it, for to see her, to embrace her, to, heaven help us, possess her, would lead only to disappoint, disgust, jealousy, dysphoria, and a host of demons chuckling and cackling the moment the spunk shot out of your body, the moment the interview was over, or simply the very moment you set eyes upon her. Such is the way in which the demiurge has set the rules for this dime store board game, in which we all find ourselves, dragged, as we are, this way and that, by the metaphysical magnets which lurk just beneath us. We know not why or how, only that it is so. We are all not very different from those plastic, pint-sized hockey players strutting and fretting upon the plastic fields of arcade games played by children in the bowels and hovels of corrupt capitalist cloisters and community centres, with those despicable smirks pasted on their vile faces, and with the grease of cheap, breaded, fried fowl fermenting in their obese, entitled, boyish bowels. Belief in this sort of, what is most likely entirely metaphysical nonsense, has been a constant in mankind's puny, wretched head since he first roamed the savannas, and, doubtless, well before, we've all experienced things and events which seem to have proceeded from some sort of moral necessity, at the same time that it is clear to most of us that they are nothing of the sort, that they are random, chaotic, and accidental, that even if they are determined, moral necessity has clearly played no part in them. And yet it is more than usual for an elderly person to look back on their lives, whether they have been more pleasant than not, or have contained an appalling preponderance of suffering, to look back and see it all as possessing some sort of instructive, didactic meaning, as if it were all of a piece, a sort of epic, which had to be thus, that in no way could have been otherwise, as if it had all been mapped out, as in a play of the greatest quality, as if, for the individual at least, all the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. It's clear to us that a great deal of this arises from the fact that we've been cast into the world with this or that character, which snaps us back upon some predictable road or other, like migrating salmons, tides, or pendulums. We all pursue what is appropriate to the character with which we've been thrown into this shit show. This or that spider spins, this or that web, this or that bear hibernates in such and such a den. This is a simple enough assertion, a truism, if we merely consider the character we've been given, been blessed with, or cursed. And yet the world seems to give us both what we are and what we crave, what we always were, are now, must be, and will die as, what is most correct for a being such as us, not as in what is most soothing or beneficial, rather, what is most correct, in the sense in which the fates of protagonists in epic tragedies are correct. We say things were bound to happen. What does this mean? Is it as simple as that they were bound to happen to such a one as us? We hardly control the motion of the moon and stars, and yet we are allied with them, puzzle pieces in the universal jigsaw puzzle, which would appear as no puzzle at all to a being standing outside what appears to be chaos to us monkeys, stranded as we are on a flying rock. It and we might seem the work of a very fine, nay, transcendental artist, one full of wisdom, who sculpts, writes, or composes works with the most astonishing and self-assured technique, one whose foresight is seemingly infinite, and who provides those works with the deepest and most satisfying coherence. But that coherence and foresight cannot possibly exist within us. We are insects, borne aloft on a wind which is wild and powerful and chaotic, yet somehow intelligible to us, at least in retrospect. This is all palpably absurd and deeply obscure, and yet we all feel it, the atheist, no less than the most simple-minded religious person. This can all be readily dismissed as teleology, New Age nonsense, as the purest gibberish, these obviously infantile notions of justice and karma, of a universe which somehow dispenses justice, as if it were nothing other than a vast cosmological preparatory school or monastery. There is no end to the refinements of palpable nonsense to which man has gone seeking to justify this. Persistent, inescapable, intuition, just as surely as every thoughtful man rejects it. And yet, every man is none the less convinced of it, by virtue of his experience, more and more so as he ages, and never more so than at the end of life. Omens are not exclusively the domains of fools and grifters. We've all felt them, and we've all believed, and continue to believe in them. And if this life is but a dream, though very few of us are rowing merrily through it, then it's taking place in some sort of mind, and does not every blockhead become a sort of genius in his dreams? And if there is anything to all this nonsense, if we are all indeed mucking about in some sort of cosmological, symphonic composition, ought we not complain to the music director that it is the most abominable of pieces, with the most execrable of endings, which almost never ends as we would have imagined, as we, or others, felt or feel that it should have ended? There is the occasional death which reflects the life that preceded it. For example, he died as he lived. But that is the exception. Brutal chaos is the rule, all of which is to say that the instincts which cause us to consider our lives as the greatest of Sophoclean tragedies are as likely as not to be only the feeblest of self-justifications and fairy tales. With this in mind, we trudge onwards to meet our doom with, at least we console ourselves, some minimal honesty. Even if the design is indeed there, it clearly does not love us. When one falls down the stairs and arrives on the landing, a heap of broken bones, rest assured that it was precisely the right set of stairs and injuries for that particular individual in that particular moment, as if the universe had been waiting patiently, yet assuredly, for centuries, for that one, single, graceless misstep. Laugh not at the absurd design of the thing, but at your previous willingness to pretend it was meaningful. Laugh at the two-bit, cosmic vaudeville act into which we've all been thrown. It's all you have left, all any of us have left. The only genuine thing that remains to us, other than grievous pains, soul-crushing longings, and suffocating boredom. Well, that, and sleep, delicious and milk-laced, primordial, bestial sleep, where one's most abominable nightmare is the source of 1,000-fold more pleasures than one's greatest daytime delight. For in sleep, one is God, the demiurge, the abyss, the heavens, the inner, the outer, one's shriveled insect of a self that squashed and bogus pretense one walks through the day pretending to be, might very well be horrified, shaken, shocked, and unnerved. But that self is to who one really is, as an infinitesimal, unnoticed rash on one's buttocks, is to one's heart. It is to be scoffed at and discarded. And in doing so, one then stands at the Empyrean gates, privy to boundless, drunken eternities of luxurious, winged ecstasies, to which one can then abandon oneself, ecstasies of love, of unimaginable cruelties, cruelties to oneself and to one's enemies, many arising simply from the love of cruelty itself, that is to say, lacking the slightest reason, from without. When the ceiling of a crumbling, ramshackle forest cottage becomes the vault of heaven, the cricket in the bathroom sings as if he were the Archangel Gabriel, singing, as he rubs his little wings one upon the other, melodies, nay, symphonies, of unimaginable beauty, lost, sacred cantatas of Bach, newly discovered, and unheard until this very moment, the overture to the opera about the Buddha Wagner, toyed with writing, having completed Parsifal, or the most heartrending and gorgeous melody of one's own invention, in a style in which one hadn't the faintest idea one could compose. And, needless to say, above all else, it is the charm of this risk-free embrace of death one cherishes, after which one so often feels renewed, yet, just as often, fails to recognize what has been lost. What precisely is it that has been lost? The self you were but a moment ago, the self of the night before. It is a very different being that now arises from sleep, which now awakens from that little death, a being that does not entirely recognize the one that embraced sleep so sensuously just a few hours ago. Where has he gone, that being? We don't give it a second thought. Were it an actual resurrection, we should be astonished. But because it is a different being who has now emerged from the corridors of sleep, there is not the slightest amazement. Everything seems just as it has always been, from this being's point of view, who has quite forgotten the self so willingly cast off just hours ago. Perhaps that previous self now wanders in some asphodel meadow, or, more likely, Hades, a staggering, miserable, perpetual insomniac, seeking a no longer extant world, finding only dark shades, grievous and famished looking, with torturous looks of longing engraved on their long faces, playing inscrutable variants of something resembling chess in grim pastures. But now this new being arises, perhaps with the solution to some problem which had irked and confused his previous, cast-off self, quite pleased with himself, and scurries off excitedly to put this fresh solution to the test. And then, more than likely, having once achieved his goal, sinking into the deepest despondency, for the solution, the achievement, having now been accomplished, is now, immediately, and necessarily, a dead thing, not a sleeping thing, which might emerge, like some butterfly or phoenix, to take wing, to blaze, and soar through azure skies, but a cold, lifeless, inert thing, a hateful thing, which has betrayed its maker utterly in its having been brought to completion, a lump of coal, dumped onto what one had hoped would have been the most sumptuous and delectable meal. And then, invariably, the urge to sleep returns, to die, to beat this all down, this Ponzi scheme of existence, to lock it in some leaden strongbox, and dump it in a deep, blood-red sea. You feel it arising within you, that not unpleasant pressure in the forehead and around the eyes themselves slightly burning, closing, giving way, begging for the workday to come to a close and be sent home, where the familiar opium den of stupefied sleep beckons, like some narcotic, oriental harlot, heaving her perfect breasts towards you, gently and silently mouthing words which don't matter, only the motion of her mouth matters, of her lips, of the little shrugs and tugs of her eyes, as she beckons, this sleep goddess, this angelic hustler, who gently caresses the lids of your eyes, closes them, her musky smell carrying you off into the deepest and most fragrant stupor. This sleep, where every phantom of your past will float through space, exchanging bodies, expressing things to you they never did or could in daylight, in waking life, things which they most certainly feel and have always felt. The lover her loathing of you, the always collegial colleague his wish to slit your throat, the loving mother her wish that you'd never been born, these opaque, black boxes with whom you've spent a lifetime interacting, these angels now become fiends, but being truly neither, these phantoms who know you as little as you them, but who are only, ultimately, you, the lover and enemy of oneself, the hero and villain of one's life, the one running desperately from pain and boredom, and the one in whom it is created. We do not muddy the waters to make them appear deep. We find ourselves in mud, more precisely, in shit, which we find, to our surprise, and, if we are in the mood for self-pity, to our horror, is not the slightest bit deep, is only a surface, a mirror, in which we perceive the vapidity of ourselves. If one is lucky enough to project some negligible, yet somehow still noble portion of oneself onto another, forgetting not for a moment that that other is merely one's self as well, In a disguise of one's own invention, one is pleased. One might very well then have a sensation of longing, of love, of aesthetic contemplation, or even ecstasy. For a moment, perhaps a few moments, never more, never longer than one's longest physical climax, which is never a matter of any longer than several seconds. And then comes the stunned return to the idiot body, that gaseous, fetid stink pit from which one is destined to escape for never more than an instant. Hell is most certainly other people, as well as all the things of this world, including the creations of those people who live in you. One wearies of them. Why? Because one wearies of nothing more than oneself, and their existence is nothing other than your, and only, your hallucination, the phantasmagorias of a poltergeist who's been thrown into an alien world, who grasps at mirages with arms that are stumps, doomed, rooted to the spot. A withered, dying, nutrient-starved stump of a tree in the world of one's imagination, which never does, other than disappoint, for it creates, desires, and, without fail, falls back upon itself. The slimy, viscous meat puppet, which is the source of that imagination, a grizzled, elderly Sade in the Bastille, conversing with a spider of his own invention. One's bread in circuses can be the scum-filled landfill of contemporary culture, or they can be Keats or Webern, no matter. Either way, one is no less doomed to the hell that is oneself.